It's often referred to as the problem of evil, and it goes something like this. If God is so great, so powerful, so wise, why does he allow suffering? Famous philosopher David Hume asked it this way: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Well, then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both willing and able? Well, then why is there evil? It's a question most human beings are going to struggle with at one point in their life or another, and it's an entirely fair question. Welcome to one of the weirdest stories in the Old Testament, Job. I'm Jennifer Roach. This is FAIR's Come Follow Me podcast for Old Testament year, and we are diving into the book of Job. It is this strange allegory that's contained in the section of the Old Testament called the wisdom literature. So what is it, and what can we learn from it? First, you remember a few weeks ago, we went through the various genres of the Old Testament. They're sort of grouped together. All the books of the law are found together. All the books of history are found together. The prophets too, and this category called wisdom literature. And if you find Job to be weird or unsettling, you're not having an unusual experience. It's this very strange story. Part of what might make it even weirder for you, though, is if you read it outside of its genre. If you read it as prophecy, if you read it as history, if you read it as law, it's not going to make very much sense to you. Honestly, even as wisdom literature, it still doesn't entirely make all that much sense to us. And yet there is wisdom to be found in this allegory. So the story of Job is asking a really important question, one that we all ask at one time or another. Why is there suffering? Why do little innocent children suffer? Why do babies get cancer? Why do loved ones die? It's often referred to as the problem of evil, and it goes something like this. If God is so great, so powerful, so wise, why does he allow suffering? Famous philosopher David Hume asked it this way: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Well, then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both willing and able? Well, then why is there evil? It's a question most human beings are going to struggle with at one point in their life or another, and it's an entirely fair question. We hear lots of stories about a person in the midst of a struggle who decides to step out in faith and trust the Lord, and things turn out well. Right? They pay their tithing, and the needed money comes in. Or they follow the advice of a prophet about parenting, and they're blessed with adult children who remain faithful throughout their lives. But it's really easy to take those stories and turn them into something of a default setting. A setting that says, if I obey, I will be blessed. It's a hard one because it's true. If you obey, you will be blessed, but not always in the way that you think. Sometimes the loved one dies. Sometimes the needed money does not arrive. Frankly, this idea that it's a simple formula. If I obey, God gives me exactly what I need. It's a comforting idea. It's the belief that righteousness acts as this cosmic insurance policy, that if you're good, you will prosper. And if you suffer, well, you must have sinned. It's a clean, if-then world, but it leaves us with a lot of questions. What about the faithful person who follows the Lord and still suffers, still does not get what they need, still their loved one dies? And at the same time, it's this truism we can't ignore. Throughout the Book of Mormon and throughout the Old Testament, we see a consistent pattern, in so much as ye shall keep my commandments, you shall prosper in the land. This is all throughout covenant history. It's a story of how God deals with his community. Seeing that pattern is not wrong. That is a true pattern. But it's not the whole entire story. It doesn't mean that we get exactly what we are asking for from the Lord. Prosper doesn't necessarily mean getting the thing that you want. So Job's story is really different, especially when you set it against the background of all this covenant history of God saying, if you obey, you will prosper. It shifts the lens from the community to the particular individual. Job reminds us that while a nation might prosper under divine law, even in the midst of that, a righteous man can still find himself sitting in the dust, covered in boils, having lost everything. The book of Job exposes the if-then logical fallacy that often poisons our empathy and poisons maybe how we even see the Lord. We can break it down into about 3 parts. First, there's this reversibility error in it. Think of it this way. If a man is a millionaire, he might buy a Mercedes. But if you see a man driving a Mercedes, you cannot assume he is a millionaire. He might be in debt up to his ears. He might be borrowing the car. He might have bought it used. Likewise, while sin can lead to suffering, suffering does not necessarily imply sin. Virtue may lead to prosperity, but prosperity is never a definitive stamp of virtue. Second, this realization provides the comfort of a no-fault tragedy. When cancer strikes or a child is lost, the reflex is often, what did I do to deserve this? Job stands as a resounding nothing. He confirms that there is affliction that is not evidence of hidden sin. Third, we encounter this interpretation paradox. Job suggests that external circumstances are nearly impossible to read from the outside. In reality, prosperity may be the trial that tests our humility. Adversary may be the blessing that readies us for salvation. Francis Bacon famously put it, prosperity is the blessing of the Old Testament, adversity is the blessing of the New. Even the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, the only perfect being to ever live, was not insulated from this reality. Modern revelation in the Doctrine and Covenants reminds us that he descended below them all. If the Master was not spared this pain, why do we think that our righteousness would be some kind of shield against pain? This realization shifts us away from the abstract, doctrine of justice and forces us to look at the raw, personal despair of Job. So let's go over the story in case you don't remember. The allegory opens in the heavenly court where God is praising Job. He says Job is a blameless man and that he has prospered. He's wealthy. Satan is there and challenges Job's integrity, arguing Job only obeys because God protects him and prospers him. To prove Job's genuine devotion, God allows Satan to strip away his wealth, kill his 10 children, and afflict his body with agonizing boils. Despite losing everything, Job refuses to curse God. Job has 3 friends who are no friends at all, as it turns out. The 3 friends arrive to console him, but it's pretty clear that they believe God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. If God is not rewarding you, he must not be pleased with you. That's their point of view. They insist that Job must have committed some secret sin, something terrible that makes him deserve all of this misery. Job defends his innocence pretty fiercely. He refuses to falsify a confession, and he demands an audience with God to appeal his seemingly unjust treatment. And finally, God answers Job out of a whirlwind. Instead of explaining the cosmic wager with Satan or giving some neat philosophical reason for his suffering, God asks Job a series of overwhelming questions about creation and the governance of the universe. This humbling display reminds Job of his limited human perspective compared to the vastness of divine wisdom. Job submits in awe, realizing he doesn't even need all the answers. Knowing God is in control becomes enough for him. And in the end, God rebukes the 3 friends for their false assumption, commands them to offer sacrifices, and restores Job's health. Job is blessed with a new family and twice the wealth and possessions of before, living out his days in peace. In the story, Job's deepest agony wasn't actually the loss of his wealth. It wasn't the physical boils. The loss of his family certainly would be among one of his greatest agonies, but his absolute greatest agony appears to be his sense that God has forsaken him. For 7 days and nights, he sat in absolute silence. But when he finally spoke, he didn't complain about the boils on his skin. He complained about betrayal. In Job 3:20, he asked, "Wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul?" Like, he's kind of mad that he's still alive. The physical pain was embittering because of what it meant. A broken bond with God. Job thinks it means God has turned his back on him, at least to some degree. Now, in our modern culture, I think it would be rare for your friends to come right out and say that because things didn't turn out how you prayed, God does not care about you. Your friends probably don't say that, but they also might not need to, because sometimes we say that to ourselves. Does God even see me? Does God even care? Does God even know? Is he even aware of me? We're asking questions based in that point of view. Because we do this to ourselves, at least sometimes, our friends don't have to do it. It might sound even like a woman who wants another baby, a righteous desire, and no pregnancy comes. And she has to wonder, has God forgotten her? Has God forgotten? She feels she is commanded to do these things, and the Lord is not providing a child to her. She might say, "Lord, I was following your directions on this. This is what you told me to long for. But you have not provided a child. Did I do something wrong? Did I mishear you? Did you forget about me?" So we don't have friends who accuse us like this, or at least I hope you don't. If you do, get some new friends. But we do it to ourselves sometimes. What I find most compelling about Job is his shocking boldness. He refuses to sort of live a lie. His friends, these comforters, are pressuring him to confess to sins he didn't commit. And really, they're doing this just to make their theology work. They wanted him to play the role of the humble sinner so that they could feel safe in their own righteousness. Righteous people are safe. People who are not safe are not righteous. This is their worldview, and they want Job to buy into it and confess that he has done something terrible, just so they can sit at home at night and say, "I haven't done anything terrible. Nothing bad is going to happen to me." But that isn't actually the real world. Job rejects this hypocrisy. He says, "Though he slay me, yet I will trust him, but I will maintain mine own ways before him, for a hypocrite shall not come before the Lord." Job is not buying into this. He's not playing the game. He understood something. God prefers a painful, honest truth over a pious, comfortable lie. This creates the central irony of the book. The friends of Job give their speeches, and they're often personally right and formally wrong. The tone is accusatory, understanding is limited. When Job is given an audience before the Lord, maybe he has heard enough from them because his tone becomes accusatory. His understanding is limited. He feels personally right to some degree, even though he is actually wrong. His assertions are correct. They use scriptural generalities about God's justice, but they lack a specific understanding that says the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And that is the system under which Job and all of us live. Job's friends insist that Job must be depraved because he is suffering, but they fail to see the man in front of him. And in some ways, perhaps they do a little bit convince Job that could be true. The failure of the friends is that they prove that human wisdom and mere argument are utterly insufficient to address a shattered soul. One of the friends even asks, "Whoever perished being innocent?" As if innocent people don't perish. It's a mean question. And it's untrue for 3 reasons at least. First, their advice was offered with a total lack of compassion. Instead of empathy, they give Job an interrogation. Second, they were just glib. They tried to force their toxic positivity or their forced happiness onto a man who was not ready to be happy. One man even tells him, Happy is the man who God corrects. As if he would just accept this correction from the Lord, he too could be happy. It's an easy explanation for a tragedy that was anything but simple. It's the theological equivalent of telling someone to look on the bright side, essentially. And especially telling them to look on the bright side while their house is still burning. Right? It's just glib. The third reason his friends were in the wrong is they relied on hearsay about God's nature versus revelation. They spoke about God in generalities rather than seeking a revelation for Job's specific predicament. They were smug in their searched out knowledge, but they never actually spoke with God about any of it. As a mere argument, what the friends say to Job is ridiculous. Using logic to solve physical and emotional devastation does not work. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a textbook on thermodynamics. When human reason is exhausted and our comforters fail us, only the comforter, the Spirit, can remain. And then for Job, there is the whirlwind. This is his vision of God, the actual appearance of God to him. For someone like Job who feels forsaken by God, the resolution doesn't contain an explanation, and it doesn't need to. We want explanations. Why, oh Lord, is this happening? God doesn't give him an answer. He gives him his own presence. The most important thing about this moment is not what God says, but the fact that he speaks to Job at all. Job never gets a list of reasons why he suffered. He isn't even told about the wager with Satan. And us too, right? We'll probably never get a reason for most of our suffering. We can ask why with passion and tears, but it's rarely answered. Instead of explaining why, God gives him a better answer. He gives him the mystery of his suffering being engulfed by an even larger mystery of creation. God asks him a series of questions, mostly having to do with the creation of the world, and Job discovers that suffering requires fresh revelation, requires it to be contextualized into something larger, more than logic, more than reasons. And perhaps more importantly, we in our faith, we believe in a suffering God. The prophet Joseph Smith, in his vision of Enoch in Moses 7, offers us a restoration light on this mystery. Enoch sees a God who is not a detached observer. And that's the God that Job sees. God is not a detached observer watching this drama play out. He comes to Job and comforts him when the time is right. In this vision with Enoch, he asks, how is it that the heavens weep? It's in Moses 7. He sees God weeping in his emotional solidarity with the innocent who suffer. When Enoch sees his own heart swelled wide as eternity, he sees who God is. This is the ultimate answer for Job. God does not necessarily will the suffering, and God certainly is under no need to explain himself to us. But that does not mean that he is detached from us. It does not mean that he does not care about our suffering. He is under no obligation to answer our questions of why. However, he answers a better question, and maybe a question that we aren't even asking. And he answers it with his own light and his own presence. He keeps company with the oppressed. He does not provide answers to satisfy the mind. He provides a vision to satisfy the soul. So where does that leave us? The book of Job does not give us any ready answers. You can see why it's contained in the section of the Old Testament called the wisdom literature. You have to work to see the wisdom in this, but once you see it, it's magnificent. The book of Job is not some neat philosophical package. Instead, it offers a way of enduring suffering without rejecting the Lord. It shows us that a world that is not always intelligible to us is still livable because we have the reassurance that a living God has not forsaken us. It has been said many times, God does not rescue you from your suffering. He is with you in your suffering. When something happens in your life that you prayed against, a dear loved one dies, God has not turned his back on you. He's allowing the suffering, but he's not allowing you to be alone in it. So I'll leave you with 2 thoughts. First, in your own Job-like trials, those moments where life feels cruel and the if-then logic of the world kind of fails you, do not settle for mere argument or the hearsay of others. Seek your own personal revelation. Only the voice from the whirlwind can satisfy the hunger of a God-forsaken soul. You don't need answers. You don't need to know why. You need to know the one. Second, when you stand as a comforter to others, remember the failure of Job's friends. Don't be an accuser. Don't be glib. Don't be formally correct but personally wrong. Instead, offer the pity that Job so desperately needed. Be tentative in your explanations and bold in your compassion. None of us escape suffering in this world, but at the same time, none of us are left alone to suffer either. Thank you for joining me today. Next week, we begin our look at the Psalms, a wonderful book that sometimes Latter-day Saints pass right by and maybe don't know what to do with, but we'll spend 3 weeks in Psalms. Can't wait. Looking forward to it. See you then.